Good morning, it's today again. Welcome back to Joseph's Reserves. I'm Joseph and I store 20% of my income in the form of rare coins and precious metals. This is part 2 of a 5-part series that I'm calling the Foundations of Wealth. The last episode we answered one of the biggest questions in economics. What is money? We discovered that civilizations around the world independently chose gold and silver because they naturally possessed a characteristic of good money. They're durable, portable, divisible, scarce, and recognizable, and they preserve value over long periods of time, which raises the much bigger question. If gold and silver worked so well, why did we stop using them? Did they stop working? Did they somehow lose all of their value? Or did someone simply choose a different system? Today we're going to follow the history of the American dollar, and by the end I think you'll see the biggest change wasn't gold, it wasn't silver, it was our definition of money itself. Congratulations to South Haven Coins and Bullion for being the first to comment on my last video. Thank you so much for the support. Go down into the comments to find him and start a conversation. Today, when someone says $1, we all picture this, a $1 Federal Reserve note. But for most of American history, a dollar wasn't a piece of paper. It actually had a definition. The Coinage Act of 1792 established a dollar in terms of precious metals. Silver formed the primary basis of the dollar, while gold was assigned a statutory value based on the bimetallic system and a gold-to-silver ratio. People didn't ask how many dollars is this ounce of silver worth. Instead, they asked how much silver is this dollar worth. The dollar itself was defined by that silver and gold amount. It was a completely different way of thinking. Gold and silver weren't investments, they were the actual money. So, what happened? The first major turning point came in 1873. Congress passed legislation ending the standard minting of silver dollars from privately supplied silver. They ended the free coinage of silver. People were no longer able to bring their raw silver to a bank in exchange for coinage, effectively severing the dollar's definition in silver and moving the United States towards a gold standard. This became known by many critics as the crime of 1873. Now here's the question I want you to think about. Did silver stop working? Did silver suddenly become less durable, less scarce, less recognizable? No, the silver itself didn't change. The law had. Supporters believed that moving toward gold would align the United States with major world economies and create greater monetary stability. Critics believed it reduced the monetary role of silver, contracted the money supply, and shifted financial power towards creditors. And when I look back at this moment, I don't see silver failing. I see a decision to redefine what backed the dollar. Whether you agree with that decision or not, the direction had changed. Then, 40 years later, in 1913, another major shift happened. The Federal Reserve was created. Its purpose, according to its founders, was to provide a more elastic currency and reduce the banking panics that had repeatedly shaken the American economy. The idea was that a central bank could better manage the liquidity during financial crises. Supporters saw stability and critics saw centralized control over money. Regardless of your opinion, something important happened. To most Americans, those notes became the dollar. But remember, at this point, the dollar still had an official definition tied to gold. The paper wasn't the foundation, it represented something deeper. Then, 20 years after this founding of the Federal Reserve, came the midst of the Great Depression. Banks were failing again. People were frightened, and many Americans wanted gold instead of paper currency. Instead, President Franklin Roosevelt issued Executive Order 6102, generally requiring Americans to surrender gold coins, bullion, and gold certificates to the government in exchange for paper currency, with certain exceptions. The administration argued that this would strengthen the banking system and expand the government's ability to respond to the Depression. but most viewed it differently. They believed Americans had been separated from the very money that had anchored the dollar. Here's the part that fascinates me. Gold didn't disappear from the monetary system. Foreign governments would continue settling international obligations in gold. Gold still mattered. Then, after World War II, leaders from around the world met in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. The goal was to create a more stable international monetary system. The United States dollar became the world's reserve currency. Foreign governments would exchange the dollars for gold at a fixed rate of $35 per ounce. Think about what that means. Internationally, gold was still the foundation. Domestically, Americans couldn't redeem their dollars for gold. Again, the relationship between the public and precious metals have changed, not because gold stopped working, but because the system we were forced to be a part of had changed. Then we get to one of the most overlooked moments in American history, the Coinage Act of 1965. It removed silver from most circulating coins, the dimes and quarters. It reduced the silver content of half dollars before eliminating it entirely just a few years later. So, why did this happen? They say it's because the market value of the silver in these coins were becoming too valuable. Really, it's that the dollar had inflated to a point that the face value was no longer feasible for this amount of silver. People were hoarding their silver coins instead of spending them. And if we think about that for just 1 second, if silver wasn't valuable, no one would have hoarded it. The human behavior here by itself tells us something. Silver still had value. Unfortunately, the response wasn't to change the face value to keep silver in circulation. The response was to remove it from circulation entirely. And that's how entire generations grew up without ever using silver money. Eventually, people stopped thinking in ounces and they thought only in dollars. Then came the moment that permanently changed American money. By the late 1960s, foreign governments were redeeming more and more dollars for gold. American gold reserves were shrinking. If anything, this just points at how many Federal Reserve notes were printed at this time. If other countries were able to redeem more dollars than there was gold, that points at the entire cause of inflation. In response, on August 15, 1971, President Richard Nixon suspended the dollar's convertibility into gold for foreign governments. The gold window was closed. For the first time, the dollar no longer represented a defined amount of precious metals. Today, the dollar isn't redeemable for gold, it isn't redeemable for silver, really it's just redeemable for more dollars. What used to be a note that promised you an amount of precious metals is now just a note that promises you another note. It's accepted because it's legal tender, and supposedly society has confidence in the system behind it. That is the monetary system we live in today. This is the question I keep coming back to. Did gold fail? Did silver fail? When I study this timeline, I don't see precious metals gradually becoming worse money. I see a series of policy decisions that gradually reduce their role in everyday life. Some historians view those decisions as practical responses to changing economic realities and financial crises. In my own conclusion, it's very different. When I step back and I look at this timeline as a whole, I see a gradual shift away from defining money by precious metals and towards defining money by government-issued currency. I believe that shift gave policymakers greater flexibility over the money supply, and whether you agree to that conclusion or not, I encourage you to study the history yourself. Now let me show you something I think is fascinating. This American Silver Eagle says $1, and this Gold Buffalo says $50. These aren't collectors' fantasies. These are legal tender coins produced by the United States Mint. Now let me ask you a question though. If gold and silver stop being money, why are we still minting legal tender gold and silver coins? Why not just stop making them altogether? And here's a follow-up. Would you trade this Gold Buffalo for a $50 Federal Reserve note? Of course not. Would you trade the Silver Eagle for $1? Absolutely not. Instinctively, we all recognize the value that the metal has is far greater than the denomination stamped on it. So here's the question that keeps me thinking. If the public uses paper currency while the government continues to mint legal tender gold and silver bullion, what does that tell us? To me, it suggests that precious metals never lost their monetary characteristics. They simply stopped circulating amongst the general public. Today, most of us transact with Federal Reserve notes. Meanwhile, the nation's official bullion coins continue to be struck in gold and silver every single year. I find that contrast incredibly revealing. It's almost as if there are two different monetary worlds, one built around paper currency used in everyday commerce, and another that quietly acknowledges the enduring monetary role of gold and silver. I'll let you decide what that means. But to me, gold and silver didn't fail. They weren't replaced because they stopped working, the system changed. And with it, our definition of money changed. If you like this video, make sure you hit the thumbs up button, go into the comment section to start a conversation or continue one, share the video if you know someone that may like it, and subscribe if you haven't already. And to my long-term subscribers, thank you so much for your continual support. Make sure you go to josephsreserves.com to check out my merchandise, zip-up bags, coffee mugs, and the It's Today Again coffee. But most of all, thank you so much for watching. And just remember, every ounce adds up. So no matter how small, just keep stacking.